Mayor Sticks?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney?
I'm over here.
Councilmember Blatz is here. Councilmember Francina is here, and Councilmember Wyrick.
I'm here.
Thank you, and welcome to the April 12th, 2022 meeting of the Ojai City Council. Randy, will you please do the pledge for us? Thank you. Thank you, Randy. Okay, approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, roll call, please, Gail.
Councilmember Blatz?
Yes.
Councilmember Francina?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney?
Yes.
Mayor Sticks?
Yes.
Councilmember Wyrick?
Yes.
Thanks, Gail. Okay, any presentations, James, tonight?
No presentations today, Mayor.
And we do have one commission report from Brian Aikens for the Historic Preservation Commission. Thank you, Brian.
Hello, Mayor. Hello, Council. Hello, everyone else. I'm Brian Aikens. I'm the Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. That's the hat on I have at the moment. You'll see me later with a different one. I would just like to report that the Historic Preservation Commission called a special meeting on February 28th. That was to address the two options that were being proposed for the El Roblar Hotel. We met for 2 hours on that. Seemed like a long time there until last week's meeting with the Planning Commission. And I actually came to a unanimous decision to go with option number one. And so after listening to multiple sides, after listening to staff and professional people, that was, and what it was it was not a motion. This was different. Usually we get together for landmarking and make a recommendation to you. In this case, we were only sharing our opinions and our individual recommendations. So it wasn't a recommendation from the Historic Preservation Commission. It was a recommendation from each of the commissioners themselves to the Planning Commission, which they could then adopt or they could change their mind. And so last Wednesday, April 6th, I, as a representative of the Historic Preservation Commission, attended the Planning Commission for 4.5 hours, and it was very interesting. I do want to thank Mayor Sticks, who was our liaison for this last quarter, for hanging in for some very long, highly technical, very involved conversations that would have put a normal human being to sleep, and probably did online. But anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Mayor, I have a
Thank you.
question.
Yeah, just one saying, thank you, Brian, so much, and it was a pleasure watching you work. You're all so professional, and it was fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this is to the city attorney or to Brian, but we held up the bringing to planning the old Roblar Hotel, waiting for your, it wasn't necessary, so like you said, it wasn't lawful, it wasn't in any ordinance, it wasn't in any policy. You just met to give them, the 5 commission members, your thoughts on what they should do to move forward. And so I don't know who this goes to, but
let me
is
take that one if I can.
How was that created that we could hold up a project without some formal, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, I'm just saying, without some formal recommendation coming forward? If it was just a discussion, why?
So our code does provide for the HPC to review and comment on, but not approve, any historic resource report prepared for any project. So the code contemplates HPC having a review and comment session, but not approval. And that's why we had the review and comment session, but not approval.
Thank you.
So it was within the code, and then it was done.
I just needed to understand it better. After listening to what you just said, I just went, well, if all you were doing were giving it a yay or nay up and down, it was like, why did we spend so much time holding this project up? When that might have been done sooner than later, other than I think we were waiting for the report?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that we were waiting for. We had made a recommendation to the applicants clear back at the end of last summer when the Caltrans report came out, even before the Caltrans report, we had, in our mind, thought that there was a historic component and it needed a historic resource report. And so I had actually made that recommendation to go to the city, ask for a historic resource report at that time. That wasn't heeded. So in lieu of that, I had told the applicants and alerted Steve Quillisi that as soon as that new historic resources report came about, that we would hold an emergency historic resources commission meeting. And we did that just as soon as we got that report on February 28th.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Brian. All right, well,
And Mayor, I just had one follow-up question. So this state report, how does that, it seems like it may impact a lot of projects moving forward. Is it necessary? Is there anything in it that says that, that the downtown now is historic? Why are we allowing the state to interfere with city business?
So it's not on tonight's agenda, so I can only give a brief comment and then we can have a discussion about it. The brief comment is repeating what was said at the prior meeting. The state in their wisdom determined that the downtown is a downtown historic district for CEQA purposes. So any project that comes through that's within the district that is subject to CEQA has to assess whether it will or will not impact the historic character of that downtown. And in this case, the hotel was subject to CEQA at that size, so we had to assess it, and then we ended up going through with an exemption once it was determined not to have an impact. The council could look at some strategies to minimize that impact upon the other projects, and I would recommend if that's the desire, we do that as a future agenda item at another meeting.
May
Well,
I comment on that?
And can I do a follow-up? It's real simple. It seems like the word CEQA is what's going to generate what actions that we have to take, correct?
Yes, and we could, for example, look at local CEQA thresholds to adjust the impact of that.
Okay, thank you.
I promise short.
Thank you, Mayor.
My very short comment is that's already on a future agenda item.
Right, that it is.
To address, for this council to take up CEQA thresholds within the range of local discretion.
Great.
Which is another reason why we need to do it.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mayor.
sure. Thank you, Matt. All right, we'll move on. A report out from City Attorney for the March 28th closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. At the March 28th, 2022 City Council closed session, the council met to consider the Ventura water litigation and took one reportable action, which was to unanimously decide to move forward with the city request to join the Upper Ventura River Groundwater Agency, a groundwater sustainability agency that's a joint powers agency that covers about a quarter of the city, roughly the Y West, as distinct from the rest of the city, which is an Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency, which the city is already a part of. Now the city is going to request joining Upper Ventura River Groundwater Agency, and it's joining the JPA, so it'll go through a process that'll come back to council for formal approval, but council did provide the direction to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, just a quick reminder about meeting protocols. One of the jobs of the mayor is to facilitate the meeting and make sure we get through the city's business in an effective way. We are asking everyone to follow these rules. Please raise your hand and wait to be called on, no crosstalk. Please bring it back to the chair. And Councilmember Blatz and Francina, if you could use the raised hand icon. Please be brief and to the point, stay on topic. And please refrain from comment or deliberative discussion on an agenda item until after we have heard from all members of the public. When you want to ask a staff member a question, please avoid turning your question into a comment. Please write down your comments and share them after we have heard from the public. Please use respectful language and a civil tone and volume. Note on the volume, we need peace and calm to make good decisions. So if a voice is raised, we'll stop until the volume drops. When you're out of order, I'm going to use the gavel. So thank you very much for your cooperation.
Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
can we all get a copy of that?
Yeah, I want a copy of that.
Of course, yeah, I'm happy to
Because it
share.
feels like it needs a little tweaking here and there.
Okay, we'll move on to public communication.
And Madam Mayor, before we go to public comment, did we formally approve the agenda?
Yes, we
Yes. we
Okay,
did.
thank you. I missed that in the
Yes,
other
I
preference.
recall we
Yeah,
did.
yeah, yeah, we did.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to public communication, and just a reminder, these are items not on the agenda, and because they're not on the agenda, we cannot discuss them. When you make a comment, we're not ignoring you. We appreciate your viewpoint and participation. We can agendize for the future. Normally, public comment is 3 minutes. If there are more than 25 comments, and there certainly are not tonight, so don't worry, I will be asking the council to reduce the time to 2 minutes. In the sense of fairness and efficiency, please stop talking when the time is up and model civility and respect. No giving away time to another speaker, no yelling, name-calling, or swearing. We're doing our best to run an efficient and a productive meeting, so thank you very much for your understanding and participation. So we'll begin with Jeffrey Starkweather, then Bill Miley, and then Wendy Larner.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, staff. Hopefully there's some public. I'm here as actually representative, as the president of the Ojai Valley Democratic Club. And I just want to, I've already invited the City Council directly, but I want to invite everybody else and the public because we are going to have our new Congressman, Salud Carbajal, here in town on the 24th at the home of Delaney and Doug Labar, 206 South Blanche Street, from 2 to 3. And one of the reasons I'm announcing it is because, and you've gotten the press release here, I am a member of the Sierra Club, and I happened to get my newsletter, and there it was, this endorsement, not only of Salud, but of Julia Brownlee, our former congressman, who actually is part of Ojai. She's the Upper Ojai. And this was one of the most effusive endorsements I've ever read. I just wanted to read real quickly, just 2 paragraphs. The Sierra Club said Representative Carbajal understands the urgency of the climate crisis and highlighted his record as a member of the Climate Solutions Caucus and the Climate and Environmental Justice Congressional Task Force. He introduced bills to help local communities improve the resiliency and the adaptability of water-related infrastructure and encourage renewable energy. And he has championed efforts to strengthen water resiliency and designate Los Padres as a protected wilderness. As I wrote in this press release, we were especially pleased because Carbajal combines both climate solutions and social justice. And we believe that most residents that's what most of our residents of our valley desire, so all residents and future generations can equally enjoy the beauty and outdoor treasures of Ojai. I would add one more thing. So this is a chance for you to talk to him. This is going to last like 2 hours. He's going to only speak for like 10 minutes to take questions, so there'll be plenty of time to talk to him. Remember now that starting a year ago, we had, I forgot what they're called now. Pork barrel, but I can't think of the right word. Earmarks, sorry. So attached to the budget, don't let the congressman say I said that, attached to the budget are earmarks, and I looked at his Santa Barbara website, and he had given a lot of earmarks to important programs. So that's something that we in Ojai, since we're only Ojai and Ventura in his district, we should take advantage of this, come out and show our support, and see if we can get some more support for our congressman, not only in the environment, but a lot of other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Next, we have Bill Miley and then Wendy Larner.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Bill Miley, and I've lived here since 1968. At the April 7th Park and Recreation Commission last week, I spoke on the pickleball play issue with constructive comments about the potential for Sol Park as a pickleball center. I already have yellow? No. Okay.
I'm,
And value.
go ahead.
And the value of the pickleball activity for preventing folks, especially older folks, from falls and early chronic injuries and deaths. Also at the meeting, Tim Kraut, Ojai Pickleball Incorporated and a pickleball ambassador, spoke of the number of pickleball folks playing during the month of March. Just during the weekdays, there were 23 weekdays, and there were 709 individuals who played during the month in those 23 days. The number gave me a new grandeur insight on the value of pickleball for all, especially seniors. Since falling injuries are a major health issue as well as cost, the more folks who play pickleball, in my opinion, the less falls, the less medical and other costs. More seniors are able to have good quality of life as they age, and are able to age in their homes. The healthier large groups of folks will be. So, a very valuable public health, medical health, primary prevention intervention is what I'm talking about. So, I hope you will agree with me that the preventive benefits of pickleball can be, should be, a big selling point for county government to agree to developing a pickleball center at Soul Park. It would meet the criteria currently not met by having pickleball play in a close urban area, and especially it would mitigate the pickleball play repetitive impact noise production. So, preventing falls and improving quality of life is a grand goal, and I hope you'll go with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Next, we have Wendy Larner, and that will be the last public comment.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My subject tonight concerns discussion item 2 from the March 22nd meeting and the action that was taken during that meeting to form an ad hoc committee for the further review of the REACH Code ordinance. Because of time restraints, I did not have the opportunity to complete my statement that night. My closing remark was to be, please, council, do not, out of hubris and the desire to be the first in Ventura County to do something, make rash decisions. It's really important to know, understand, and reason through how our electricity is generated at origination sites. The availability of adequate green energy, the cost and economic well-being of all the people. Price incentives and rebates are not free, someone pays, and they are not permanent. Consider, too, the environmental costs of these alternative sources as well. It is so important that a bundle of unintended and perhaps irreversible negative consequences are not created by your decisions. Now to my point tonight. I very much appreciate your desire to carefully consider the issues raised in council discussion and public comments at the last meeting by forming a REACH ad hoc committee. But since the Climate Emergency Mobilization Committee were all like-minded on the subject of climate crisis and may all have belonged to the same lobbying activist organization, I respectfully suggest that you already have the benefit of their input. For that reason, and a fact that the original committee was contrary to protocol given 3 extensions, I think members of that committee should not be on the newly formed ad hoc committee. I also suggest that good governance and stewardship of the people's civil rights require that you research and consider the input of excellent, credentialed, unbiased, by grants, scientists in many related fields, as well as economics, agronomics, statisticians, and the learned from other disciplines who may disagree but do have things to say about this issue, that may disagree that there is an existential climate emergency, or may agree that there is, but disagree on what can sensibly be done about it. Those of us in Ojai who have the ability to read and research, exercise logic, apply common sense, but do not have expertise in any of the related fields may not be equipped to make the best case. But we can certainly provide or point you to a wealth of quality information.
Thank you, Wendy. Time's up. Much appreciated. All right, we will move on to the consent calendar. Motion to approve?
Mayor,
Oh, yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Anybody on Zoom?
I'll ask.
Okay.
If anyone in the Zoom queue would like to comment on public communications, please use the raise hand function now, and I'll call on you. No one's raising their hand.
Okay, thank you. All right, move to approve the consent calendar?
Move to approve items A through H on the consent calendar.
Okay,
Second?
that is everything. Okay, roll call, please, Gail. Can we have the roll call? Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Francina,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney,
Yes.
Mayor Sticks,
Yes.
Councilmember Wyrick,
Yes.
Councilmember Blatz.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to discussion. Item number 2, the 2022-2023 General Fund Budget Forecast. And I just want a big shout out to Pam and James for doing the impossible and getting us through COVID. And we're still here, so thank you so much. Done an incredible job, much appreciated.
Mayor, can I add something to that comment too? And as much as we appreciate what Pam and James have done, we should also reach out to the community and say thank you for staying with us and supporting us and giving us money that those two could manage. Without that, they wouldn't have been managing anything. Took us all.
So we have a presentation?
Yes, and with us being back in chambers, we're trying our hand at a different technology. Let me see if it's going to work. Give me 1 second. We have a presentation we'll try to keep brief, but let me see. I don't see. Okay, I think that's why. Okay. All right, I think this will work. So it's not perfect, but this will work. Okay, so we have a presentation we'll try to keep fairly brief. I think the big thing with this first budget workshop, particularly this year and after the last couple years, is kind of just understanding where we're at from a big picture perspective. The last couple of years have been kind of almost like a rubber band effect, where we've talked about, and this slide shows, our revenues kind of bouncing around, going up or down, and then as we kind of looked back at the last 5 years, we realized that even 5 years ago, what we call the last pre-COVID year of 2018 to 2019, we were still recovering from the Thomas fire, so we really haven't had a regular quote-unquote budget year for longer than 5 years, really. So we wanted to start with tonight looking kind of big picture. What's it looking like? What are we expecting? And I think the positive that you could see right off the top, looking at our first slide showing revenues, is we are anticipating, or we have seen this year that revenues have increased to the highest level in 4+ years. And we're expecting that trend to continue, and we've seen it kind of getting stronger as the year goes. As you can see in the chart, the first year of COVID, our city revenues had dropped to $10.2 million. That increased to 11.3 the second year. By the end of June, we expect this year to be closer to 12.3. So basically $1 million year over year over those 3 years. And we're expecting, we're proposing in our budget for next year that our revenues will be $13.1 million. And so that is pretty substantial growth. It also does show how much of an impact the city faced those first 2 years, especially of COVID, where the revenues had dropped $2 to $3 million respectively each year. So the big question you may ask at that point is, what assumptions are we making to come to that conclusion that revenues will keep growing to about $13.1 million? So this slide lists some of the basics. We're assuming that the recovery continues from the pandemic and that there's no further business closures. If there were any business closures, we would expect the revenues to not meet projections. But we, at this point, looking forward, we don't anticipate that happening. We also only assume the current hotels are open. Obviously, last week we had the hearing for the El Roblar Hotel. The operators at that meeting stated that they anticipate it will be about 16 months to get reopened. So this budget does not include any revenues from the reopening of that hotel or any additional hotels from what we currently have. For cannabis tax, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on tonight, we're assuming that the existing vendors continue to operate, the 3 dispensaries. We are kind of backing out the manufacturing revenue, which we had anticipated receiving this year, as we're hearing more that those manufacturing businesses are not getting moving as quickly as we had thought that they would. So it assumes that the 3 dispensaries remain open with no additional manufacturing sites at this time. We also assume the continued trend of cable franchise fees to keep reducing as more people move away from cable and towards online subscription. That impacts our revenues to some extent. We also do not include any potential new businesses. There's another business that's going to the HPC Thursday, I think, which is the Playhouse Theater, for example. We don't anticipate any revenues from those businesses yet, just because the timeline's not certain yet of when they will open and begin operations. And we also don't propose any major changes to current operations. I know we've talked about some potential ideas, such as the Soul Park partnership. Those are not included in the first round of the budget, but it's something based on feedback from council that we can look at. And then finally, the budget reinstates the transfer to the CIP from our TOT, our hotel tax, but at a 10% level. We had eliminated that the last couple years due to budget challenges, but we're proposing reinstating that in this year's budget, and so that's reflected in the proposed budget as well. And I'll go through these. I'll try to go through these fairly quickly and then take questions towards the end. So, up front, when we're talking revenues, I think that the important thing for us to look at are what we call the big 3 revenues. And we have a 4th there, but the 4th one is not to the same level as the big 3, but it's an important topic. So the big 3 revenues for the city of Ojai are the hotel tax, otherwise known as the transient occupancy tax, the sales tax, and the property tax. And what I think this chart shows that we're pulling up on screen here is there is a perception, I think, that the economy is really recovering and that, we're seeing more people in Ojai and more people shopping and things like that. And I think one thing looking at these trends that's interesting is that sales tax is fairly flat. Property tax is growing a little bit at a time, which makes sense because the city gets just a small portion of property tax, so it doesn't grow very fast. And so the one tax that really increases dramatically and that has been driving the growth in our revenues is the hotel tax, which increased from $3.5 million in revenue in 20 to 21 to 4.4 million this year, and we're projecting to increase further to 4.6 million next year. Those revenues also have kind of a doubling effect, not quite doubling effect, but because of Measure C, as those revenues grow, we also get that additional 5% towards CIP projects. So that revenue is very important because even this year, if we're projecting 4.4 million, for example, that means that we'd also be projecting $2.2 million in Measure C revenues, which is something that did not exist prior to 2020. So that's where we're seeing the most growth. That's where we're seeing the most impact, and that's where we also get that double benefit of Measure C. So looking at those, when we look at our revenues and we see that the revenues have grown by $1 million over the last couple of years, what you can see looking at these revenues is that it's the hotel tax which is driving that increase, and we expect that to continue into next year. Last on this slide, again, not one of the big threes, but we thought it was worth talking a little bit about, but the cannabis tax, over 3 years. The first year, when it was just implemented for part of the year, we received about $188,000 in revenue, which had ended up being about $30,000 a month. That pretty much continued for 21 to 22, where now we're a little bit lower than projected, but we're at about 320,000. We had thought that we'd get closer to $400,000, but that was when we thought that the manufacturing businesses would be operating. And so next year we're showing 300,000 in revenue, which is actually a slight decrease. And I think the reason why Pam and I talked about that one quite a bit, and I think that the real reason there is just all the cities around us are seeing this from the increased competition on cannabis tax, that the tax revenues are starting to either kind of top out or even start to revert a little bit. So we show in our next budget that number going from the 320,000 this year to 300,000 next year. So, and also for the first time in this budget, we show that those cannabis tax revenues go transferred into the reserve per the city council's adopted policy. So every dime of cannabis tax will immediately move into our city's emergency reserves. So. I'll try to keep these brief, right? I'm going long on these. So the next slide, we show the city's revenues, kind of taking a step back. The slide before looked at tax revenues in particular. This slide shows kind of the major revenue categories. We highlighted three things. One was the tax revenues, which show what we just spoke about a minute ago. Those are increasing, but it's basically increasing by the amount that the hotel tax increases. So that's really the only place we're seeing growth at this point. The other thing we highlighted in this chart is the recreation programming, which you can see how severely impacted that was from pre-COVID. We had about $600,000 in revenue to during COVID dropping to as low as $140,000, which obviously it's hard to run rec programming when the people are being told to stay at home and not, congregate or things like that. So we are seeing that bounce back up to about $270,000, and next year we're anticipating growing that a little bit more by adding some senior programming that we're working on. So that's an area where there's a big swing, but I think we're projecting fairly optimistic. And then the last box that we highlight on this chart is the COVID funding assistance, the American Rescue Plan Act funding. We are anticipating that we've received one, but we're anticipating a second payment of $893,000 in the COVID funding. And so those are shown here, but we wanted to kind of separate that out because it would make it look like the city's revenues grew when they really didn't grow. It was just that we're receiving these one-time COVID funding payments. So we just wanted to call that out and explain that a little bit more. So we are expecting to receive the second payment shortly of that. So we'll have those two American Rescue Plan Act payments. So revenues, that's really the big picture in revenues. Again, we're seeing steady growth mostly from the hotel industry, and we're projecting increasing from the $12.2 million level to the $13.1 million level next year. And I would say it's fairly conservative, but Pam and I always try to keep in mind that our city's adopted financial policy is to budget conservatively. So I think we're in line with a conservative, realistic estimate of next year's revenue. So now that we've talked revenue, we wanted to talk a little bit about the expenditures that we show in this budget. And so I'll go through these very, very briefly, and some of these are hit on a couple slides, so I won't get too detailed. But Really, the big picture for this year's budget is, with that increase in revenue, focusing on catching up on deferred maintenance, key projects, like making sure to fund key projects, prepaying the debts, like the pension-related costs that have a compounding effect by prepaying them, rebuilding reserves, and rebuilding staffing levels. And so I think those are really the 5 key areas that, as we talk about the different expenses in the budget, every expense really falls into one of those categories. And for example, one of the first things we are proposing is increasing all of the budgets for maintenance for facilities, parks, streets, and trees. And that increase in the budget proposed is about $150,000 for those categories. And that's in the general fund, but those also, some of those costs are also reflected in the capital improvement project budget, which will be the second workshop. So we're proposing increasing it here, but we're also proposing utilizing some of the different Measure C funds and things like that for some of these projects too. So a big emphasis on catching up on deferred maintenance. We're also proposing reinstating the prepayment of the retiree medical payment, the $100,000 prepayment that we had done for, I believe it was 4 or 5 years at this point. And so we're proposing reinstating that. Some of these things had been cut only like when we were really trying to cut the budget during the worst of the pandemic. So this budget reflects a lot of those things being added back in at this point. The budget also includes the largest contingency fund budget to date, $450,000. We've had a contingency fund for about 3 years. It's been about $100,000 to $200,000, and we've used it each year. And I think next year, looking forward with some of the litigation issues and things like that, the water litigation and some of these other projects, we are expecting to have the need for the largest contingency, which will allow us to fund unanticipated projects. So this budget includes $450,000 for that. It also includes enhanced code enforcement services, expanding on, we had done the most last year, and this kind of builds up on that a little bit more. And then it also includes rebuilding the staff levels by filling the remaining vacancies. We still have a few vacancies left from when we froze some positions, and also adding 2 additional maintenance workers. And I want to explain that quickly because in the budget, or in the packet today, we had a consent item that talked a little bit about my Ojai, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about that quickly. We don't want to have it be its own full discussion item, but the impacts of the my Ojai application are we're trying to make sure we budget for those to help offset some of those things in the budget. And so just quickly, the My Ojai application was the smartphone application that we launched 11 months ago. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. And that's the smartphone application that allows residents to take a photo with their smartphone, report an issue, and have the location and everything tagged on the smartphone. And so to date, we've had 1,205 downloads of that application, which far exceeds expectations. When we first got that application, we asked the software developers for a city our size, how many people would they expect to download the app, and they said about 300. Okay. And so I had told them it would be 10 times that. Yeah.
They don't know Ojai.
Yeah. I told them it'd be 10 times that. We're not quite there, but we're at about 5 times that, or 4 times that at this point. And so one of the nice things about that app is not only can people report issues quickly, but we can also print reports very quickly. And so using that app, we were able to look at all the requests so far, and there have been 604 service requests in the first 11 months. 382 were for code compliance, and related to one of the items later tonight, 59 of those were for gas-powered landscape equipment. And so that was the biggest chunk, which again reiterates why we keep adding more funding for code enforcement, because we just see here the evidence shows that is the highest demand right now for service, according to our My Ojai application. And so 59 of those 382 complaints were for gas powered landscape equipment. The other big categories were noise issues, RV parking, tree trimming, commercial filming without permits, zoning violations. And then early during the pandemic, we were getting a lot of COVID-19 compliance related complaints. So again, all of those are reasons why additional code enforcement would be a priority, a recommended priority. And then the second biggest category is 190 for public works. The bulk of them are potholes, which we've also, I think, done pretty well at getting those filled fairly quickly. And so we've had potholes, parks issues such as playground equipment issues, sprinklers issues, trash issues, and then sidewalk repairs and trash in the city right of way. Those are the big categories for public works. And so one of our recommendations is to include some public works maintenance worker positions so that we can create, kind of a pothole crew that can work on those. Also with paving being the big project planned this year, being able to work and coordinate with the paving. So, and then we received 32 other issues. So across all the other departments, 32. So it's very clear that the big demand is code compliance in public works. So that's where we're proposing to use some funding for additional staffing. And so, and there is a report kind of on that in the consent packet, but we just wanted to call that out as a little bit of the explanation. Regarding the expenditures, so what we propose is essentially a balanced budget at this point. This is a first draft, so we expect to get feedback and we'll bring back changes. But with the start, it's fairly balanced. It's about a $40,000 deficit, which we can balance. But we wanted to start with the realistic picture. Now, I wanted to have this slide. It just speaks a little bit to. Obviously, the first question I would ask is: last year we were at $11 million. This year we're at $13 million. Why the $2 million increase? Have we gone on a spending spree? And I think it's actually. The opposite is that the last couple of years we went on a cutting spree, and this year we're trying to start adding things back in, restoring service levels, and public works and code enforcement. That's a chunk of about $700,000. Increasing our contingency fund, increasing rec programming, increasing and then an increase in our insurance cost, and an expected 5% increase in our sheriff's costs. That's another chunk. That's another chunk under the departmental operating expenses of about $500,000 in increases, and then reinstating all the transfers that we deferred during the pandemic, because in the pandemic it was very easy to say let's just not transfer money to CIP this year, or let's not transfer money for equipment or vehicle replacement. But if we are going to want to start replacing equipment and vehicle. And even, we had talked about electrifying our fleet and things like that. At some point, we need to start putting some money into those accounts to do that. So that's included in this budget with about a $700,000 increase as well. So between those three categories, you could see about $2 million in increases. So those are the bulk of the increased expenditures this year. And we have that in more detail. I won't go through that unless there's questions. But so at the end of our first workshop, kind of from a big picture perspective, what we're looking at is about a $13.1 million in revenue that's anticipated, and $13.14 million in expenditures for right now a shortage of about $40,000. Again, I would say that's pretty much a balanced budget in the scheme of things. And so what we, and then the positive you can see from this slide is that over the last 2 years, because of the reductions we made and then over time that recovery, we actually are looking at those 2 years rebuilding our reserve by ending up 21, 22, and 20 to 21 with surpluses for each of those years, which it puts us back to where we're at now, which is we've rebuilt the reserve. We're actually slightly higher than when the pandemic started. I think we're close to about $4.7 million in reserve right now. But if we adopt a budget of $13 million, because our goal is a 50% reserve. Our reserve goal would be about $6.5 million. So we'd still have some work to do to meet that goal. So that's our proposed budget at this point. A couple quick points, and this is more to kind of prep for, or to start thinking about for the next council meeting. The next budget workshop is going to be Measure C and CIP. And so we just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of the revenue that we expect for Measure C that we will be able to use towards projects. I mentioned earlier that now hotel tax, when we used to get $1, now we get $1.50 with Measure C. And so when we look at next year and it's a record hotel tax of $4.6 million is what we're expecting, that also means $2.3 million in Measure C. And so you can see from this chart that by the end of next year, we'll anticipate having about $6 million of Measure C. Some of that's been used for projects. And so when we go over the Measure C budget, we'll show what's been done to date and what's still planned for today, planned for the next year from some of the projects that had carried over. But there will be some additional funding for the council to identify some more priority projects at the next workshop. So that's coming at the next meeting. And so we broke it down to, there's like 5 general areas that we wanted to get feedback on, but of course we're happy to take any questions and walk through it. But really the 5 general questions, the first one is the big one to me, which is the general feedback from council of if this budget at $13 million is realistic, optimistic, aggressive, or conservative. And we think it's conservative realistic, I think is what we would say. But I think one of the points we want to make, like we said, in the last 5 years, we've had the Thomas Fire and the pandemic. So, we think that it's paid off to be conservative over the last few years. And I think that's a good place to be. But so that's kind of the first general question. Second, we recommend reinstating the TOT to the CIP transfer, the transfer of hotel tax for capital improvement projects. But we're recommending it at a reduced 10% level this year. The idea being that we had cut it for a few years, so it's time to start getting back into doing that. But with Measure C, I think that we will have to look at that policy because I don't know that a 20% transfer is needed anymore. We have other funds now that can be used for those. Which will free up some general fund money that can be used for priorities. Third, the contingency fund. We noted that $450,000 is included, which is the highest level to date, but there's a question of if that's adequate. We have so many things going on, and the water litigation is one example that can utilize those funds very quickly. So we wrestled with having more at some points, and at some points trying to pull it back. So, fourth, which will also be a topic at the next meeting, is that right now in the budget, $103,000 is included in community funding. That was $204,000 in this year's current budget. So $103,000 would be a reduction. So I anticipate that the council will want to talk about that and identify what level of funding we'll need for community funding. And then last, we are going to bring this back to Budget Committee and discuss it a little bit more, but we were looking at, as the budget recovers, prepaying some other unfunded liabilities like pension costs and prepaying those to reduce long-term costs of those items. But we want to do a couple rounds of review on that with the Budget Committee to determine if it really is worth it to cut a little now to save money in the long run. So that's something we'll talk about with the Budget Committee, but it's another priority item. So with that, that's kind of the big picture, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And as you mentioned, I didn't let her get a word in, but Pam, our finance director, is here as well. We ran through this 3 or 4 times today, so I probably talked right over it. But we're both here to answer any questions. So.
I need to know if I'm doing the raise hand function correctly. Can you see it?
Let me unshare my screen so that we can see you. Give me a second. Okay, so we should be able to see you now,
can-
but I don't see a raised hand.
I can see you, Susan. Do you have a question?
Yes, but I also want to know how to, I clicked raise hand, does it show up?
No, you want to just use your real hand?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think it's working, unfortunately.
okay. Okay, I have a couple of unrelated questions. First, what is community funding again? I'm sure you explained it, but I missed something.
So community funding is the category that we had funded. This year, we had funded $204,000 for the Fire Safe Council, $50,000, Chamber of Commerce, and I believe they were at, I think it was $100,000, and then the museum for $50,000.
I thought. I wanted to
And then
make sure.
Independent State Committee for $2,000. So that's what's included in this year's budget. So that's proposed at $104,000 next year.
And my other question is sometimes I'll remember things that I thought were part of the budget, but they haven't happened. And I keep noticing that there's still no cover on the trolley stop in front of Bank of America, that heat island there. And I don't know what category that is, or if we need to put that back in, or how to go about making sure that that happens.
Yeah, so that's in the capital improvement project budget, and that is included. It's included in our CIP budget. So that one we're going to go through in more detail at the next meeting, but that item is included right now, scheduled for, I believe it's next year, being, July 1st. Starting July 1st is when it's scheduled.
Okay, now that's the part I don't understand, because it seemed like we asked for it maybe as long as 2 years ago, if not longer. So what's the delay?
Yeah, so the CIP is a 5-year plan. And so some of the items, when they are requested, get added this year, and some get added onto the plan 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. I want to say that item was actually included in this year's plan, and they're working on the engineering. So it could be completed this year, but I think just realistic, I think it'll be after July 1st. Probably, between July 1st and October is what I would think.
Oh, so you're saying that it could be completed this year, or just getting started?
Yeah, they're doing the engineering of it this year, but I don't think the engineering will be done by the end of this year. When I say this year, I mean by June 30th.
I didn't realize that a trolley stop required engineering. I think we also did discuss putting up something really just temporary during the hot part of the summer. I know we discussed that. And perhaps we could look at that again, because if we want people to ride the trolley, that is just such a key location, more so than ever, with all the things going on in town.
Okay,
So,
more questions? Let's stick to questions. Bill?
I have a few, but I'll start with just two. And Pam may be the one who has to respond, because it's a little technical. The inflation factor is, looks like the highest in 40 years, affects both sides of the ledger, the revenue side and the expenditure side. So the real question is whether there's a disproportionate impact. If it affects both sides at roughly the same percentage, then, we're balanced. But I'm thinking, for example, we have basically looks like no inflation factor in the sales tax projection at all. And on the other hand, we have expenditure issues. And so I'm just basically asking how you thought about approaching the inflation factor in the forecasting on both sides of the ledger. And the other question I have is, do we have an update? I remember years ago a pretty healthy rate of return on paying down, for example, the unfunded PERS liability, and wonder if the Budget Committee has been presented with the current rate of return on paying that liability down in terms of reduced future payments. So those are two questions I have.
And I'll answer the second one, and then I'll let Pam speak to the first one, because the second one, so the answer on that is that we are scheduling a Budget Committee meeting for the next, I think, what did we say, by end of April is what we were trying to do. Where we're going to have GovInvest, which is the company we had contracted with to monitor that and provide reporting of the pension liabilities. So we're going to have a budget committee looking at that, and that is the issue we're going to look at is for every dollar we spend, how much are we saving in the long run? So we are working on that for end of April. And then second, I have a very non-technical answer to the inflation question, but I'll see if Pam has a technical one before I answer. Your microphone.
Sorry. How did I come up with the sales tax projection? I did look at the inflation factor, and what is published is based on the base year. And depending on which, which factor you use, it might be from 19 something versus what I try to do is what has happened since the last year. So I look at inflation from year to year. And so far, year over year, it's been about 2 to 4%. And recently, of course, there's a lot more. If you look at some factor, it's the cumulative rate of inflation is about 14%-ish. So to be conservative per our policy, I try to look at, we use HDL as our consultant, and I try to balance their projection with what I feel is conservative, and in discussion with James as well, what have we realistically collected? There's always projection of how much we're going to make, but do we really collect that?
And on the expenditure side, how are we building in the inflation factor?
I think it was 5%.
I'll have more questions later.
Okay.
And if I can add, my non-technical answer is that growth we're seeing is in hotel tax, and our hotel rates are increasing like crazy. It doesn't take a financial guru or a city manager to look at the inns rates and see that they're off the charts. So for us, that's fortunate because that does help us hedge against inflation because the hotel tax keeps increasing because the hotel rates keep going up. So we have that. As Pam mentioned, sales tax, we do contract with HDL, and they also we made sure we worked with them on, we looked at their projections and we took that. And then the one thing I wanted to say about sales tax, we noticed looking back the last 3 years, it was $1.8 million every year. Like very little change from 1,808,000 to 1,820,000. And so next year we proposed 1.9 million, 1,916,000. And really, we talked about it. Like that is the reason we proposed it increasing to 1,916,000 is because of inflation. I think we've seen that the numbers are very flat otherwise. So that's, I think, a 5% increase. So.
You might know property taxes so large.
Yeah, and that's, we talked about the big three, the property tax. It's interesting because everybody knows house prices are going up. Same thing like we said, hotel taxes, anybody can tell you that house prices keep going up. But it is interesting looking at the patterns is it takes years for that to be reflected. And it also is small increases, again, I think because we only get that 1% of property tax. So when somebody's house goes up $200,000, we're getting a very small piece, so.
And Prop 13.
Yeah, and Prop 13 limitations, so, all right, thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Other questions?
As my eyes gloss over on inflation percentages, it's so interesting. What's inflated today, 6 months could go down. I mean, it just changes, it fluctuates so fast. So aside from that, I have a couple questions. And on the transfer of the TOT revenue to capital improvement, the old policy was 20%. We're thinking of 10% because of the Measure C.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really had that discussion.
Right.
What are we giving up by not keeping it at 20%? Could we pave more? Could we, what improvements could we continue to do to the community to enhance it to get caught up from COVID?
Yeah. When you look at our capital improvement project list this year, the number one item is paving. And I think we were looking at, there's different funds, so like we keep getting a number and then we realize there's another fund, but I think we were looking at the largest paved job ever in Ojai, which was going to be about $1.5 million, I think, with all funds, all the different revenues that were going to be used. So with Measure C, or because of Measure C, we are going to have the biggest paving project we've ever had.
Right.
And so that's a positive. But, you know, if we had the funding available and we could do the full 20% transfer of hotel tax over to CIP, that would free up another $450,000 or so. So it could be a $2 million paved job.
Right.
Or we could the council could identify other projects, you know, for those funds, other capital improvement type projects. So it's a balance, and that's where we think the 10% is a compromise, because we had cut it for a couple years in tough times. It's like starting to get back to paying ourselves for those projects, but not doing it all at once, and also recognizing that we do have this $2.2 million, $2.3 million of Measure C coming in that we did not have 2 or 3 years ago to help offset.
So the other question that I have, James, is on the deferred maintenance that we have on our facilities. Has Public Works actually created a list of projects that they feel that they're way behind on? Like, you know, I'm at Sarasota every weekend for soccer, and as I look at the ball diamonds and I look at where the turf and the dirt meet, there's about a 2-inch differential there.
Yeah.
So you can manage that by either taking the turf down or you can bring the infield up.
Yep.
I don't think we've done any infilling in years. So again, that would be a project that I would be looking at Public Works for us. Rather than CIP, that to me is just general maintenance that needs to be performed. It's like general maintenance on painting facilities. So
Yep.
That's the question, are you going to provide a list of these deferred projects when we reach the Measure C expenditures and the CIP expenditures?
So we aren't where we want to be. We had our new Public Works supervisor started on 1 week ago today. And so we had our Public Works supervisor's position vacant for 6 months. So we aren't where we wanted to be. We hoped to have, you know, all those reports on the facilities done prior to these discussions. We have the person on board now. We're going to have those discussions. There's a couple of ways we're thinking about handling that in the budget. One would be identifying maintenance funding and then being able to come back later when we have those lists and say, okay, these are the priorities that we need to use that funding for, which is what we did in the general fund budget to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But so we aren't where we want to be. I think we have the people in place now where we're going to be able to get to that point. And so we're working on it. To address the specific issue you raised, the ball field issue, that is listed on the CIP for the fiscal years. Kind of throw me off. It's either in the CIP for 22-23 or 23-24. But I agree with you on the sentiment that we need to have somebody who's looking at that and seeing, is it going to make it to that point or does it need to get bumped up and we need to come back to council? So that's what we're going to do with our Public Works supervisor.
I just to follow up, I just think that we need to stop. I think we need to have that discussion about, is it CIP or is it actual deferred maintenance, which to me are two different areas.
Yeah, that's true.
And then, Mayor, I have 2 more questions after you. Pardon me? I have 2 more questions. I'm yielding the floor to you.
No, we need to stick to questions, no commentary at this point.
Microphone?
Microphone.
Question.
Yeah, I have more, but I don't want to displace Ryan if it's his
Ryan,
turn.
do you have any questions? Okay, do you want to go ahead?
This council gave very positive direction to expand or allow expansion of dispensary services several months ago. It appears in this budget, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the question, that there is no anticipated implementation of that direction in the next fiscal year?
It's not that there's not anticipated implementation, it's that we aren't comfortable projecting any increased revenue yet. And so the very simple answer as far as timeline is we're working on that item coming to Planning Commission for the second time, either April 20th or May 6th, the first meeting in May. The date I might be off, but we're anticipating the cannabis report that would allow for that expansion at that time. And so if the Planning Commission makes a decision at that point, that could be coming back to council, before the end of this fiscal year, theoretically. But we just didn't, Pam and I looking at the budget and seeing that the revenues have started to kind of level out, we didn't want to bank our budget on that, so.
And then the other thing is, this is something I brought up for years, and thank you for that. I've always thought that and I think it's still the case, that we're really not completely using the authority that's in our code for fines for repeated violations of code violations. We do warnings, we tend to do repeated warnings, and I wanted to point out that we are talking about enhanced code enforcement service, that shouldn't necessarily just be done by general fund when we do have authority, especially for repeat offenders, to use the fining mechanism, both to fund the code enforcement service as well as get a little more desired result in terms of behavior changes. So I just want to point that out, that it doesn't look like we're looking at any increase in fines for revenue.
Do you have a question about?
Yeah.
About this?
Yeah, it doesn't look like we are
Okay.
assuming that, I'm sorry. And then my last thing is, in what category of the 604 service requests are short-term rental violation complaints?
Short-term rental violation would be in the code compliance category.
Yeah, there's
so
604. I was wondering which of those categories
Yeah.
of 604 are short-term rentals. I didn't see it listed.
It's in the, so I put that slide together this morning, so I just omitted it, but it should be in the list with the 392 complaints in code compliance.
It's in the 382. Okay.
I would say that the reason why, I would say that I don't think the number triggered it being one of the top 5 on the My Ojai,
Right.
because most people don't complain about short-term rentals using the My Ojai app.
Okay.
The complaints for short-term rentals are typically calls or emails where people say, here's an ad and I found it, versus My Ojai is you're out somewhere and you take a picture of something. So we do, that's one point, is on that My Ojai slide, the 600 issues that we've received. That doesn't mean we don't receive them still in person, by phone, by email. It's just, this is like a new reporting option. And but to your point, short-term rentals and gas landscaping equipment, we are now on citation on the first offense, which has been interesting. I think we've been doing that for about 6 months. And I would say what we're seeing is it works much quicker. People that had said they'd work on fixing it after the warning before are now actually fixing it on the first offense. So it's working better for us. So I think that's continuing, but we didn't see we're not hoping for a huge increase in either of those violations either, so.
Randy, question?
If our reserves are tied into our cannabis tax, and we're trying to work our way up to a $6.5 million based on our $13 million budget, how do you plan on doing that with collecting less tax in 22-23 than we did in 21-22? So that's the first question. That's a big how. Then the second question is, should it come back to council that we actually have a discussion of total revenues, income, and percentaging to the reserve for future increases in that? So we might look at how we fund it and can we fund it differently? And you don't have to answer that tonight, but those are my questions. If we're relying on cannabis tax and we're projecting less next year than we do this year, then that means our reserves are not going to be growing like we're projecting them to be next year, unless we fund them from another source.
Right, yeah, I think the very simple explanation is if we're projecting 300,000 in cannabis and we adopt the balanced budget, we're expecting the reserve to grow by $300,000. So to your point, it's not going to get us to 6.5 million in a year. It's as you know, with the current circumstances, it would take us several years to get to that point. So whether to change that or to consider it would be a council discussion.
So Mayor, we're gonna, when we're done with the Q&A here, we're gonna open up to the public. Then we're gonna come back for another deeper dive on some questions and discussion on this. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. No more questions? We'll move on to public comment. We have one public comment from Bill Miley.
Right there.
Oh, okay. And then Brian.
Good evening. Two parts to this. First one deals with community funding and the proposed $103,000. With last year, $204,000. So I have 4 points. One, this is about a 50% reduction from this year's adopted budget. In my opinion, this presentation functionally states less value for this year's funding grants for the Chamber, the Fire Council, and the museum. 3, I see this reduction as a policy decision which does not seem appropriate for an administrative action. 4, it seems more appropriate to replicate the amount of this year's appropriation and let the council decide the policy, which would be the amount. Second part here has to do with revenues. Regarding sales tax, with thousands of tourists coming to our city, their TOT tax revenues are going up because of the increase in TOT percent. Sales tax revenues are flat at 7.5% or 7.5 cents per dollar. 1 cent, as I understand, of that 7.5 cents goes to the city. It seems time to ask voters to raise that sales tax to help pay for the wear and tear tourists bring to our town. And a key part of this would be to know what, on an estimate basis, how much of the 1.9 million sales tax comes from tourists. I would suggest that that may be up to 75%. So I think it's time to seriously talk about asking the voters to raise that to help pay for tourists who bring good stuff, but they wear and tear our city. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Next, we have Brian Aikens.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian Aikens, president of the Ojai Valley Museum. I put up my Ojai app for you, so you see, even though I'm not a resident, I'm still included. First of all, I want to thank Finance Manager Greer, James, the council, the employees, and the community for the fine job that you did. I've always been complimentary of the city for the way they manage their money and pay their bills. So congratulations to you. I'll get to my thing first. So last year we asked for $50,000. That was in consideration of everybody taking a reduction. Our expenses this year, it wasn't because our expenses were necessarily down, although we fight that with every bit we get. Right now, we're about $1,400 above where we were last year. This year, we're asking for $60,000. We got a jump, and you'll see this when I give you the slides next week. In the first month, we spent $3,420. I reminded James that was the negotiation we put into where the museum bought the compressor in July of last year. And we said, just keep in mind that it will show up in the graph when it comes later. So again, $60,000 is we discussed in our finance committee. It's the amount that was put forth by our treasurer. and then was approved by the board. And then we'll have more information where Wendy started filling out the forms yesterday. And so we'll have all of that to you at the next meeting. In the 100 minute, 21 seconds, I just was reviewing things I do when my grandson, which we were watching on Sunday, is taking a nap, reviewing the budget on my iPhone. 34% of the budget was where your reserve was. It says that the budget then went down to $700,000. It said you were very conservative, and somehow the city rebuilt the reserve to approximately $4.76 million as of the end of 2022. Congratulations on that. And then to get to the 20%, that you'll need to get up to 6.55, 50% of the 13.1 million. 4.76, that's 1.79. So in the last year or two, you recovered what looks to be almost $4 million. Now you've got 1.79 to do. I see the reserves in there. Reserves are always good because things happen. Anyway, congratulations on that, and I look forward to talking with you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Gail, any public comments on Zoom?
If anyone in the Zoom meeting, in the Zoom queue would like to comment on this item, please use the raise hand function now.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will move on to discussion now.
Why don't we ask them to speak
Oh, well,
first?
I don't see a hand.
Calling them.
Anyone like to start?
Ryan, Souza?
Hey, I'll take care of it, Randy. Anybody like to start? Ryan, Souza, Bill, Randy? Who wants to start? Go ahead, Bill.
First of all, thank you very much for the way this is presented. And this is the first of several rounds. So with attention to time, I'm going to pay myself and ask my colleagues that if a lot of particular questions, we can interact with staff without taking up all this meeting time, because we're going to have several bites at the apple. Okay.
Yep.
I just want to mention a couple of things. One is that I really feel it's important because it hits so many positives that we budget, that we find a way to budget in our contingency, and perhaps it's already there, for the possible arrangement with the county on Sewell Park. So I know you very properly call that out separately, but I think we have a meeting with the supervisor very soon. I think there's a great win-win there, and I think that we really need to make sure that we have room in the budget to handle that if indeed we can implement it in the next fiscal year. I think that's very important personally. I just making that point. Also on the, when we get into the, I guess, I don't know whether this is equipment or Measure C, but I think we need to look at aggressive movement to, from internal combustion to electric in our public works fleet, particularly given very high used prices for trucks right now. And that's worth an analysis.
Yeah.
And also the expanding into the microgrids in our parking lots, making sure we have feasibility for that, integrated with what works or doesn't work in those more remote locations from our city hall facility, as well as the implementation of a greater density of chargers in our parking lots, perhaps integrated with expansion to microgrid. I think all of this is important in terms of the sustainability issue. And the other thing that I didn't hear that I just am going to point out that I'll just ask for further analysis of is what we're doing to the Help of Ojai facility in terms of renovation for facility. And I don't mean for sustainability, and I don't mean just electricity. I also mean what we're doing with the water consumption, whether or not we have a plan where we maybe can apply for grants for even maybe gray and black water upgrades that could be integrated into our restoration, the community garden and the Stewart Canyon thing. So I'm just asking for, I'm not dictating, but I just think that we need to continue to think about these things in terms of how we build them into our contingency. And just little things in our equipment budget. For example, we're woefully inadequate in bike racks everywhere. And we need to be looking at how we plan for that in the next fiscal year. So these are just general comments I'm making. And obviously, we'll get into more detail on a staff, conversation basis.
Yeah, and the Sewell Park that you mentioned, that would be in our operating budget. If, that would be something we'd have to include in the operating budget. But the electric fleet, EV charger, microgrid, the Help of Ojai facility, and the bike racks would be capital improvement projects, so those are going to be discussed at the next council meeting. We're working on those now, so we'll definitely take the feedback, though. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Randy?
So I just want to touch on these electric vehicles real quick is, Bill, Councilman Wyrick, I'm not sure if you're talking about trucks, but at this stage, they're just coming out. So I would defer any truck purchase for 2 to 3 years. However, there's no reason for some of our supervisors to have to be driving around in trucks. When there is.
I'm talking about.
When there is vehicles that are already proven, electric vehicles that are already proven, to be of quality and to be capable replacements for get around, especially in our small community. So
Pick up, get a utility, yeah.
So I think that's important when we look at that. Again, I want to get back to this reserve because, James, I just keep seeing this reserve fluctuating. I mean, we're at 13 million this year. We could be at 14 million next year. If we're 14, 23, 24, then that puts us even at a greater deficit in the reserve. So I think that we need to come up with something that's better than just cannabis. I think cannabis is a good start, but I think we need to do something better. In fact, Brian Aikens just said that it was 1.79 million that we would need to get caught up with the 6.5. I don't see that happening overnight. So again, maybe 50% is the goal, and maybe that's not achievable because of budgets fluctuating. So that's one comment. The other comment is, how can we enhance it greater than $300,000 a year? That would be my other one. Getting back to Mr. Miley's comments about the community funding, we went from 204 and you dropped it down to 103, but you didn't necessarily tell us what you deleted. So I would have thought the budget would have started at 204, and council would have then had that conversation with you regarding what we're going to remove. So with that in mind, I had asked for an assessment of chamber projects versus projects that we're doing in-house. What can we remove from their responsibility or from the request that we have through that contract service with them, so that we knew specifically what we were removing and also what they would be accountable for. So that's one of them. I'm not sure on the other ones. Again, with inflation and with Mr. Aikens asking for, it looked like a 7% increase, something of that nature. Where are you, Ryan? $10,000 more on $50,000. So however that works out, but again, we might be looking at all the other entities that are going to be requesting.
Yeah.
The last thing I have is, we've collected to date. We haven't collected to date. We are projected to collecting to date $6.286 million from Measure C. Can we have some, or how do we account for that money and where it's been spent? Do we earmark it in our, and Pam, do we earmark that anywhere in our budget as Measure C money spent on this and
Yes.
cannabis tax money, reserved and done it?
Yep.
Can we do that?
Yes, we can, and then that's, the only reason we didn't get into that at this meeting is because that is what the second workshop is going to be about, is looking at the revenues, what has been spent, and what's available to spend.
Because that'll help us to see what we have caught up on and where we are, and and help us prioritize what we need to do in the future.
Exactly. The other thing we're doing that night, if I can jump in real quick, is that night is the night that we'll also bring the applications. The applications are currently available right now for the community funding groups. So we don't know at this point exactly what's being asked for. We have heard that some groups may be reducing what they're asking for. But so those applications will come back at that second meeting. And so right now, just to speak to the comment about, the way we budget being making policy, which I am very careful with. This is not me making policy. This is me telling us right now with our current budget what we can afford. So it's not me saying we should be giving this group this much, this group this much. It's this under these current set of projected budgets, we can afford 104,000. Now, can council give more if desired? Yes, we would have to make other modifications to do that, or vice versa. So I just want to speak to that just quickly. So
Right. You don't have to, I appreciate that response. First of all, you have my complete trust, you and Pam both regarding this. So, but we will get into more of that.
yeah, we'll dig into it next
Okay.
meeting for sure.
That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Anything from Souza or Ryan? Nope. Go ahead, Ryan. I think are you muted?
The hand up thing was working, but I don't know. I don't know if anybody could see it. I have a couple kind of questions, and then that might lead to some comments. But and I don't know if this is for you, James, or Pam, or whoever. But looking at just some of the what is other tax revenues in that category? What exactly does that make up? Because everything else is pretty delineated as far as what the taxes are coming from. But that is a 58% projected increase. What is the other tax revenues category made up of?
I'll let Pam give a little bit of the detail on it. So,
It's in section 1 on the revenues.
yeah, number 6 in section.
Yeah.
That line consists of business license and documentary transfer tax.
Okay, because it's licenses and permits is a different section below.
Mm-hmm.
So is that not?
Those are community development licenses and permits. So
Okay.
number 6 is specifically the business license fees. And I know, like you said, it looks like a jump there at first because the adopted budget last year, or for this current year, was $275,000. But if you look the line over, what we're projected to end the year at is $413,000, probably because we put more of an emphasis on collecting the business license costs this year. And so next year we're showing, it looks like a big jump, but we're just showing a $20,000 increase to $435,000 from.
Okay, so it's business licenses, but it's not due to an increase of new businesses, but more likely just a better job of collecting businesses that already exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you on that one. And then my next one was plan check fees, and then the next section is jumping up 150%. What accounts for such a large increase in the plan check fees?
Yeah, and this is like the hard part is that it's $114,000 jump from what we budgeted last year, but the reason why we're expecting that big jump is because the next column is what we actually got last year, and the actual plan check fees came in much higher than we budgeted. So we had budgeted $76,000 in revenue for when I say last year, I mean the current year we're in.
Yeah, I understand.
It increased to what we're actually ending up at is about 170. So then again, we show a slight increase to 190, but it looks like a big jump compared to the original 76,000. But I think on all the planning fees, what I think in a nutshell, like a easy summary that happened with planning fees is we thought planning fees last year were going to drop, at some point, and planning activity has just taken off and, hasn't slowed down, and we kept thinking it was going to slow down and it hasn't. So it stayed pretty much in line with its historical norm. And so this year we kind of kept waiting for it to drop and it never did. So this year we're going back to the historical norm.
So James, we underprojected last year and we think it's going to go back up based on the numbers that we got last year.
Exactly.
Right.
And, you could say that when you look at where we were last
I saw
year,
the numbers on the right. I just wondered there's still another 20% increase after that. And I wanted to see if I just didn't know if there was something inside of that projection other than just looking at where we were last year and, our best guesstimate.
Yeah, and looking at the activity with planning fees, we always look at like the projects we know that are coming up. We know that the Playhouse is coming, the Roblar is coming. We talk to the Inn every year about what they're planning to do. So there's some of that built into it too. But it's funny, we were talking about this, that when we first prepared the budget last year in April of 21 is so different from now, even though we're talking about the same fiscal year. And so at that point, we had thought that the closures were really going to keep impacting things. And obviously now, thankfully, we were wrong about that. So hopefully that trend continues. So.
All right. And then going down to expenditures, I understand 20% health insurance. Now is that, but then I also see 77% in workman's comp. Is that from adding employees, or is that, because that's a significant jump. Workman's comp doesn't usually change that much year over year.
Yeah, we got notice from most of our insurance is through California Joint Powers Insurance, CJPIA. We're self-insured with a lot of other smaller cities in that CJPIA. And they every year give us their estimate of costs, and their estimates this year are that insurance costs are going up for everybody pretty substantially. I was actually pretty surprised at the first time they sent us the first estimate, but pretty much across the board, and we'd called it out when we were talking about the big increases, almost all insurance costs, and this is not health insurance I'm talking about, but all the insurances we get through CJPIA, which is like property insurance, crime protection, workers' comp, all those things that we kind of coordinate with through our CJPIA, all of those insurance costs are shooting up, so.
Yeah, that goes to my next question, is the 53.5% increase down in the next section. We have all those other insurances broken out. It just has one insurance and 53.5%. I was wondering what makes up that increase, and is that JPI stuff or is it something else?
Yeah, that's the bulk of the CJPIA. Just all the premiums we pay are going up, and so they're all under kind of that umbrella. So when we pay, CJPIA, and they send us a invoice and it'll say like property crime up 10%, this thing up 5%, this thing. But when we looked at it, it was just, that was one of the biggest increases was just across the board. I think it ended up being, like you said, 50% year over year. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Susan, any comments?
No, thank you for asking. No.
Okay. Well, it sounds as if we're moving towards consensus, and we're in deep gratitude to, once again, Pam and James for getting us out of there. And, and I love the phrase cautiously optimistic, as we restore our core services. So just to remember that it's not a blank check and that we are paying off our debts and reserves, and finally, completing the staffing vacancies and the retirement. I'm for motion.
Move, receive, and file.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please, Gail.
Councilmember Wyrick,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney,
Yes.
Mayor Sticks,
Yes.
Councilmember Francina,
Yes.
Councilmember Blatz.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, let's move on to number 3, gas-powered landscape equipment prohibition review and update after 2 years of enforcement. Take it away, James.
Thank you. We had talked a couple times at council about doing a review of our gas-powered landscape equipment prohibition, and potentially looking at modifications we can make to the ordinance to make it either stronger or to potentially add some items to the list of items prohibited. So this report is intended to allow for that discussion. As the report notes, about 2 years ago, January 28th, 2020, the City Council adopted an ordinance that prohibited hedge trimmers, lawn edgers, leaf blowers, non-riding lawn mowers, pole hedge trimmers, pole saws, and string trimmers that were internal combustion engines. So we required all of those items to be electric. At that time, we had looked at several items, and we had recommended those because the electric alternatives were readily available and comparable. And so that ordinance was adopted, again, 2 years ago. We held our demolition event out here on the lawn where we demolished a bunch of the items and invited state officials to learn about the prohibition. We believe that action led to the state of California adopting a similar prohibition that is coming up through AB 1346, which is going to be implemented across the state by the start of 2024, although they say if feasible. So that one's not for certain yet. But so that's important to note because I think it speaks to some of our items where we talk about, although making a small impact in the city, leading to a bigger change. And two, because the state is going to start adopting similar regulations. So eventually, we always talk about these items impacting Ojai kind of unfairly, or maybe Ojai having to have a higher standard than even just the unincorporated area right outside of town. But I think in the state, these items are going to be coming across the board here in the next couple of years. So these prohibitions have been in effect for 2 years. We've been doing code enforcement of these violations. We have issued 138 citations to date for people that are using the types of equipment that are prohibited. We definitely saw more citations early on, and we're seeing less citations now. For example, in the last 3 months, we've only issued 4 citations, even though we've still continued to have regular canvassing of the community. I think that I believe that means that people have started to convert over to electric, and there is less people using it. Because when we stop, and a lot of times right now when we get calls about people using the big packs and people thinking they're gas, and we get out there and we find out that they are the new electric with the battery pack on them. So we're seeing pretty good compliance, and which doesn't mean we catch everyone, because I know that will be a comment that we hear a lot is, well, I know that there's somebody in my neighborhood that uses it and takes it out at certain points, and so I think we've made good progress. There's still some work to do. I think for our message to residents would be keep using the My Ojai app or the phone number to call in those issues when you see them. But we have been citing aggressively with the 138 citations. We've also been fining on the first offense for the last year, so we have not been giving warnings for the last year. And so one point we wanted to reiterate was we looked at the data for these citations, and only 3 have been issued to repeat offenders. And so what we are seeing is that I think one of the narratives is that people will say, well, it's only a $50 citation, so when you give them a citation, they're probably not going to get into compliance. But what we're seeing is when we canvass neighborhoods and we catch someone, we issue a citation, we haven't seen more than 3 people actually get a second citation. And we do think that shows that people are converting over. I didn't mention in the report, but I forgot to mention in the report, but we did for a brief period, I think it was about 6 months. We had told people when they got a citation that if they came into City Hall and showed that they had bought electric equipment, that we would waive the citation to encourage them to get the electric equipment. So we did have several people take up that offer as well. So I do think people went out and started converting over to the electric equipment. But so that's kind of the report on citation. I think one of the key questions recently, we were asked if there were any items that seemed like there was a good electric comparable item that we could prohibit, that we could add to that list of prohibited items. We looked at the chainsaws. Our Public Works Department has already converted to battery-operated chainsaws for what they call a 16-inch bar, which is adequate for smaller limbs, less than 10 inches. The chainsaws run for 10 minutes on heavy-duty usage and between 30 to 40 minutes for lighter usage. And so those work, and I think those could be added. But we do want to note that for major tree removals, for example, the tree about 6 months ago that fell across Creek Road, when we had to get that tree removed to reopen the road as quickly as possible, that was an example where we did have to go to the heavier duty gas-powered chainsaw. So we don't recommend prohibiting all gas-powered chainsaws at this point, but what we recommend that the council consider is limiting the smaller chainsaws, 16-inch bar or less, to battery operated, and then allowing either an emergency usage for the gas-powered or a size-based usage. So we haven't drafted the ordinance because we're here today to get the direction from council of whether to do that. So that's something we can iron out as we draft the ordinance. So we talked a little bit about potentially increasing the penalty or holding additional parties responsible. And we could do those things, but again, looking at the data, we don't see a lot of repeat offenses, so we don't think that it's not that the penalty's not working. I think my thought right now is if somebody's seeing a neighbor who pulls out a lawnmower at 7 o'clock Wednesday night when no one's around, it's that we haven't caught them yet, and so reporting those things is probably the best action. I don't see the need at this time to increase the penalty or hold additional parties responsible, but that would be an option for the city council to consider. And maybe people are hearing differently from people who are seeing those things. So anyway, at this point, like I said, we were giving the report back and the statistics, and then the recommendation on the battery operated chainsaw, and so the council can identify whether to make any changes to the existing ordinance or not at this time. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, James. Any questions from council? Susie, you have a question? Susan?
My question, James, did you have a chance to read Sherry Ann Cate's letter that she submitted as a public comment, in which she is she's been observing this for years, and she feels that like other people, that there are so many repeat offenders who just keep using the gas-powered leaf blowers, and Conan, and she states that no matter how much she reports it to the city, nothing is done.
Yeah, and I did read that, but I will note, and I don't know if this was a typo, but she said that it was electric powered. And so if it's electric powered, and I think there is confusion. I think some people think we banned electric powered leaf blowers, for example. So I think in her comment, she's talking about an electric powered leaf blower. But if you report an electric powered leaf blower, those aren't prohibited. So there wouldn't be any noticeable action at this point.
Well, I don't know if an electric leaf blower, there must be a typo, because she says it emits ear-piercing noise for hours every Monday morning right across the street.
Yeah, we do still get some complaints about the noise from electric leaf blowers, which obviously is not pleasant, but it is much more reduced than the gas versions. So.
Well, but I don't know if I need to bring this up later, but
This is
my question is about this leaf blower hotline. It just rings and rings, and is there anyway? You have the letter, and I hope that the issues she brings up, that we can resolve them. And I guess that's all I should say right now.
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up with them. I just we do get on occasion complaints about electric items, but there is no prohibition on electric items. So.
No, but she's saying that the leaf blower hotline doesn't work.
Yeah, we tested that today when we got that, and it did work for us. So we'll have to have somebody follow up with her to see what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Question, Randy?
Yeah, we have a prohibition on work on Saturday in Ojai.
Mm-hmm.
How does a gardener and how does a tree trimmer fit into that prohibition?
You know, I meant to double check that before the meeting, and I didn't, but I do believe that the noise standards captures it.
The noise ordinance prohibits construction work on weekends or city holidays, but maintenance that's not construction, which is defined as erecting, constructing, demolishing, excavating, altering, or repairing a building or structure. So a gardener work or landscaping work that's not construction wouldn't be subject to that prohibition. There are, though, limits for, at least for electric leaf blowers, there's hours limits, not on, that vary slightly by zone, residential or non-residential.
I think we need to, can we
Go ahead.
inform our code enforcement on that?
Yes.
And so what that, okay, so I'll save the rest of it when we come back about tree trimmers on Saturdays.
Thank you, Randy. Any other questions? Okay, any public comment on this item, Gail?
No, nobody here. Do you want me to check with Zoom? Okay. If anyone in the Zoom queue would like to comment on this item, please use the raised hand function now. And we've got one person. And it's Jay Simmons. Mr. Simmons, if you're there, please go ahead and speak. If you're muted, please, there you go. You can go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually Simon's, but that's okay. I wanted to address this. I read the staff report, and I do certainly appreciate the progress that has been made on this issue for sure. But I have used the My Ojai app and reported 3 different examples of a gas-powered unit being used, a leaf blower being used. And the code enforcement went out, talked to if they saw something, they talked with them or left something with the owner. Unfortunately, in each of those cases, they are still using a gas-powered leaf blower. And what they also have a little different strategy now where they will be using the gas-powered. You'll go up to them, they'll see that you're observing that they're using a gas-powered, so they'll shut that down and go and get an electric one. At least a couple of cases, they've actually grabbed an electric one. So they've scoped out what the problem is, and I'm really quite happy to see the code enforcement part of the new budget, that stuff going in, because this is certainly something that takes a concerted effort to really address. Because again, they figured out how to do it, and they're just going around it. So, and this is happening. We walk up through the Del Oro neighborhood. There are gas powered leaf blowers going up there, but at some point I get tired of pulling out my app and reporting all this stuff. But anyway, I wanted to let you know that there are still problems there. This definitely still needs to be a high priority for the enforcement stuff. And I did call the hotline unit the other day on one of these situations, and it just rang and no one picked up. Again, on another one, after that didn't work, I called the code enforcement section and got an answering machine and just left a long message regarding this repeat offender. And I got no response back to that. So I don't know whether that has been addressed again or not. And I would tend to like to see a tightening up of the of who's responsible. I think it was Councilmember Haney at a meeting probably a couple of years ago, but said something like, well, why aren't we addressing this with the owners? And I totally agree with that. I think if we can tighten up the language, just to make it very obvious that the owner would be responsible as well as the operator, I think that would be excellent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jay. Any other comments, Gail?
If there's anyone else in the Zoom meeting, in the Zoom queue who'd like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand now. No one else.
All right, let's move on to discussion, please.
Mayor, can I
Okay.
provide one piece of information? So I will, it was actually a good reminder because it's actually something in the budget that we kind of glossed over, but we did add a part-time code enforcement person to answer the phone and to follow up on these code issues about 3 months ago. And so in the budget, we proposed keeping that for a full year. And so I'm mentioning it just because the budget's on the was on the agenda today. That when we come back, we do propose adding that position next year because we were seeing so many calls and so many complaints. So I just want to speak to that issue. So that's proposed in the budget as presented today. So.
Great, thank you. All right, discussion?
Well,
Randy?
Am I
Randy and then Souza?
So my first thought are that we started out this program with it being informative. Let's ask our gardeners, let's ask our homeowners to be good citizens. And that was one of the reasons we set our fees so low. So I would propose right off the top that we double the fees. We've had 2 years of this. I think it's about time that, to me, I know if you want to modify someone's behavior, you generally have to affect their pocketbook. So that's just my belief only, but so I would like to see us, when you come back, to bring that. The second thing is when we cite a gardener on someone's property, it seems to be the policy right now is that we cite them and we leave, do we leave a warning or something saying you're responsible for your gardener's activities on your property?
Right now, we leave a notice for the homeowner that says, somebody was on your property using gas equipment. Here's information on the prohibition and why it's important.
So I think included in that, we might let them know what their gardener's being cited for and what it's gonna cost that individual.
Okay.
Because if we move this up to $100 or $200, that's almost gonna be half of what they pay a gardening service in the community. It's usually right around, I'm gonna say most gardeners right now are getting between $25 and $35 an hour per man. So if they're coming every week, you can do the math, most of them are coming every other week because of that. But I know these fees because I'm associated with these guys and I see them a lot. So I think that's important. This work on Saturday, obviously, we're not gonna curtail that. But how do we curtail a chainsaw from firing up at 7 o'clock in the morning and still running at 7 o'clock at night on Saturday? Sunday, I'm gonna believe most of the time that it's a homeowner who's doing something on their property. But on Saturday, it's gonna be a service. So maybe, I'm not sure how to do this, so I'm gonna throw it out. Maybe what we do is require some type of a permit for Saturday tree service operations. And along with that permit, we actually make them identify what they're doing, what type of tree they're pruning or working on. One, it would help us as far as identifying the maintenance and the care of our city trees, whether they're private or not. The second thing it does, it also tells us what size of tree it is and what's the diameter of the branches that they're gonna be pruning, which would in turn help us to identify, can they use a 16-inch electric chainsaw or do they need a 24-inch or greater? So that's how I'm trying to treat this where we help ourselves and we're not punitive, but on the same token, we make individuals aware in that business that they're disrupting the community. And so we're trying to work with them again versus it being punitive. But those are my thoughts on it right now.
Souza?
Oh, I agree with Councilmember Haney's comments on the leaf blowers, tightening things up. But I would like to figure out some way to have language where the owner is held, shares in the responsibility and also shares in the fine, because most of these workers are simply trying to do what the owner asks them, and the owner often has, the real problem is that we have this unrealistic expectation that we can keep our outdoors leaf free, which puts the gardener in a terrible position of having to use this horrible equipment. And in my opinion, I recognize that it has its place on large parking lots, but I'm sure that I'm not the only person who's sick and tired of driving and riding and walking through clouds of dust as they clean the sidewalk. So for sure, that we need to crack down after 2 years, like Randy said, and increase the fines. But I would like, if the owner can also be, if the language in the ordinance makes the owner responsible, so that, if I don't know if the city attorney wants to weigh in, but can the owner also be the owner has to help pay the fees? And especially we have these absentee homeowners who may be completely unaware, and somehow we have to make them aware that they are also responsible if their gardeners are using gas-powered leaf blowers and other equipment that is banned. That's my comment.
Mayor, happy to answer the question there. So the existing ordinance does allow citations of property owners. Our recommendation is if the council wants to expand that we would adjust the ordinance to make it crystal clear that property owners can be cited, and we could look at as an enforcement measure whether it's a citation issued, 2 citations to the operator and the homeowner, or whether it's 2 citations issued 50-50 or 1 citation jointly responsible. But all of those are within the option set.
Bill?
I'd like to concur with the suggestions made by my 2 colleagues so far for a text amendment, and would add to it that I would like to see a text amendment that comes back to council include the adding to the prohibition list less than 16-inch chainsaw bars.
Okay. Ryan, you're good? Okay. Is that a
Hold on. Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry, I'm trying to unmute.
That's okay.
Apologize.
And if we need a motion, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that I think we're missing something really important with all this, is that while it may not be 100% compliance all the time, we've had substantial, significant compliance in our community regarding this. And I want to start on the positive, because I see electric equipment all the time now, much more frequently than I see gas-powered stuff. I do agree that it's not perfect, but I want to thank our community for responding so well. This was not an easy sell to everyone. It was a hot button issue for a number of years before it was finally passed. And I think people are starting to realize, especially the understanding and working on the Air Pollution Control District Board, where we're really trying to get the information out, because it's hard for people to conceptualize that equipment that is so small and used so infrequently compared to like a vehicle that you drive in has so much more pollution coming out of it. And I think people are finally starting to grasp that. But I also think that a lot of people who aren't following it, aren't doing it, snubbing their nose at us and saying, I don't care about these things, that it's a lack of education and a lack of understanding. And I think that's still a significant problem with all this. Based on the data we have, it doesn't make sense to necessarily increase the fine. That may help prohibit some of these activities. But as James said, we're not seeing a lot of repeat offenders. I would much rather have a low first fine and an opportunity to fix it by getting the electric equipment and not having any fine, and then having a second fine that goes up significantly if we need to. But I think that first level should be, hey, let's make sure you're getting compliant with this, because there's just a lot of people I don't think who know this is a rule. The other thing is, again, we have the highest percentage of renters of any community, any city in all of the county. And it's difficult because I know there's a lot of gardeners who are at homes where there's renters, and those renters may not even be there when the gardeners are there. So I don't know if that finding the property owners who may turn around and, and punish the tenants for that necessarily works. I do think we need to get a higher level of compliance, but if we're not buttoned up on our hotline and our enforcement when people are giving us the information, then I don't know if increasing enforcement or penalties or these other ideas are the right way if we're not getting the part done that we can control done correctly. Because I know a lot of people who are very passionate about this and they've gone out and they've changed their equipment, and when they see someone else, they've reported it. But what we're hearing is that that's not necessarily circling back through the city the right way, and we're not getting it taken care of. So I don't know that I don't know if just increasing the fines would actually have any impact at all. I do agree with a second fine being much more increased if need be, if that type of punishment will actually deter the crime itself, if you will, because a lot of the time that's not the way it works. But on this, I think we have to do a better job educationally as well. I know we put out stuff and we do the same thing we always do as a city, but I know that doesn't get to everybody. It's not something that lands all over the place. I'd much rather have a continuing where we're at or something similar and really working harder, especially now that we have a public information officer at the city for the first time, really working harder to get that information out even more extensively. And I know, we say we put it on the TV, not everybody, and we saw with the cable numbers, there's just not as many people who are seeing that kind of stuff on the reoccurring channels and things like that. So, I think our community deserves some credit for doing a really, really good job so far of having a really high level of compliance before we just start pointing the finger. But I also don't know that we've gotten our own enforcement side buttoned up where we should just be increasing it because we're saying it doesn't work correctly.
Thank you, Ryan. And so what I'm hearing is, we're all happy about the progress, and that, my question, James, would it be, and those are good points, Ryan, and Randy and Bill and Susan, would it be possible to tighten up the app and the hotline, and then give a certain time frame?
Yeah, and I was just thinking, again, not to tie everything back to the budget, but last year we had increased our code enforcement from, I think it was $75,000 a year, which gave us like 3 days a week, we did it to $125,000 a year, which gave us 5 days a week. And so one of the points is, if somebody calls on one of the 2 days a week that the code person's not here, this is, the result. And so I think one thing I'm getting the sense of from everybody is that when we do our Measure C budget, which is where we were funding that work, that we will include funding to have more hours of code service, which we were going to recommend, but I think I'm hearing that there's more of a need for it. So I think we can do that as part of the budget, include the budget or the funding to have the code people here more hours. And then, like I said a couple minutes ago, we have a part-time person that is that is assigned to answer the hotline phone and those types of things. So we'll make sure we include funding for those two categories in the budget. So I think those will help address those concerns.
So, thank you.
So,
Randy?
Mayor, this is, I agree with what you said. I actually agree with Ryan with what you're saying too, is, sometimes we can be, it sounds good in the moment, and then that's why you deliberate, because then you have an opportunity to reflect and listen to other people's perspectives, so thank you. Yeah, I don't necessarily think we have to go out completely at this in a punitive manner. And maybe Ryan's right, maybe on the second offense is when you actually really increase the fine. I still think that when a homeowner, when a gardener is cited, that the homeowner needs to know, and I think we need to really make sure that that's part of that enforcement package. Councilman Wyrick said that he'd do a text amendment regarding the 16-inch bar. I think that's something that we can add to this. And I would still like to see some type of a work permit for tree trimming on Saturdays, just so that we can acknowledge how we're maintaining and actually, are we using the proper equipment to do the maintenance on these trees, along with removal. So I'd like to see that brought back. I think chainsaw is still something that we need to work on.
Do we need a motion or?
Yeah,
Is
do
that
you want to do it?
That's just direction to,
Okay.
I'm still deliberating.
Oh, I'm sorry, Souza?
Yeah, how about, would my colleagues on the council consider this, that, I mean, I agree that the purpose of the fine is not to be punitive, we want compliance. So what about if we have the fine, but the fine is waived if they purchase the electric equipment? I mean, the fine itself could be, what's the word, either refunded or waived. The thing about, if you don't do it the first time, and then the second time you do the fine, you have all this time when they didn't comply. Am I making it clear with my hoarse voice that, that there's a period where we're going to let them know that we want to get everybody in compliance. We thank everybody that is in compliance, but the ones that aren't, we have to get the message across that they're the gardeners, the gardening company, the homeowner, they're all going to get a fine unless they get this equipment. They're going to get fined. But if they get the equipment, then we waive the fine. We can give them X amount of time. We don't collect the fine immediately anyway. They get a piece of paper that says that if they get the right equipment, then we waive the fine. And they have to come in the city hall and show that they've done this as an alternative to waiting for this, what's the second offense. It's just a thought.
Ryan?
Thank you. I think James said that that's what they were doing. James, is that the policy across the board, or is that only from time to time, or how's that being implemented on as far as if they, get equipment, show your receipt, and then the fine goes away, or?
Yeah, so what we did was the first 6 months that we first implemented this, it was first 6 months were warnings. And if everybody remembers, it was because we implemented it and then COVID hit and we decided, we couldn't force people to go to stores right when all that sort of happened. And so the first 6 months we ended up doing a notice or a warning, I guess is what it would be called. Then the second 6 months we did the fine, but if they brought in the purchased electronic equipment, we reimbursed the fine or we waived the fine. But the last year since that time, it's just been the fine. So we haven't done that waiver program since that time. So
What do you know a percentage of how many people were compliant after the first fine that came in? And
very high. It was,
okay.
In this, it would be in the 90s, the 90%.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'd be in favor of even if we want to raise the fine to 100, but keeping that program in place. I mean, that's a clear incentive. I absolutely agree with informing the property owner. I don't necessarily know if we fine the property owner, but I really think if there's an incentive to say, hey, this fine will go away if you can produce the, receipt for the equipment, that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. I mean, that's both the carrot and the stick. That is a really sound policy on how to do it. Also, if it's a non-day that we have enforcement around and someone shoots us the app, I mean, if they send us a picture, do we still enforce it? Or is it strictly they got to go out and catch them red-handed, or?
So there's a couple of things we do. One is that we have our kind of standard code person. We do have a staff person who is able to respond if available, because they have other duties. So on the days that the code person is not available, if somebody submits a complaint and that person is available, we'll send them out. But
if nobody's around and there's a picture, do they still enforce it based on the picture? Or
we haven't cited on just the picture to this point.
So they do have to catch them in the act.
Yeah.
Okay, that's always difficult. And just one last thing real quick. Randy, I don't disagree with you on the Saturday thing. I don't know if it's in the scope of this agenda item to talk about Saturday permitting for tree trimming. I don't know if that really fits in the gas powered situation, but I would like to hear a little bit more about how frequently that's happening or what's going on before we just make a rule. I know that you're not allowed to do construction on Saturdays. I know that I think it's 8 o'clock for, I mean, I have a neighbor who, I mean, it's like their day that the gardener's there. It's like 7:59 every week when they're firing stuff up or whatever that timeline is. But I would like to kind of, if we're going to look at that, just look at a few of those other things. I don't know if there's a lot of changes that need to be made, but I'd rather look at it as a whole with the timing and some of the other stuff if we're going to bring that back as maybe a separate agenda item. That's all.
I mean, it's all in the same ordinance. The prohibitions are all in the ordinance we're talking about that was adopted and modified with Ordinance 906. But certainly if the council wants to have a more full discussion with staff bringing back some thoughts, then that would be reasonable.
Well, I'm definitely not against talking about it, but the timing during the week and the frequency, or if we get reports of this, I mean, I just would like a little bit more. Randy, I don't want to undercut trying to do something if you wanted to get something done tonight, but I do think I'd like a little more info on that because there might be something more important in there to maybe have a small but larger discussion.
Thanks, Ryan. Randy?
I think that was part of the direction, was for staff to actually review that, see what the complaints are regarding actual tree trimming versus noise, things of that nature. I'm sure that you're right, Ryan, we need a lot more information. Getting back to homeowners, it's interesting. If you're a renter, and your homeowner, and the homeowner who is renting to you should be the person who is accountable regarding the gardening service, unless that's not part of your homeowner's agreement, and now you as the renter are taking that upon yourself. So I'm just saying that notification needs to go to that address. If I'm renting and the person I'm renting from is accountable for the gardening, I'm going to pass that notice on to him because I don't want to be fined. And I think that's just important, is that we don't create a little gray area that, well, I'm just renting, so it's not my responsibility. It's someone's responsibility to let the person who is responsible know what's going on. So.
Okay. Yeah, good point, Randy. Souza?
Yeah, so the language should state that whoever hires the gardener is responsible, whether it's the homeowner or the renter. But I have another question, James. Why is it if someone takes a photograph, a very clear photograph, shows the gardener's face and it shows the gas-powered leaf blower in action, why isn't that good enough?
The reason is because if the matter is litigated, it goes to court, and a court can't accept or is unlikely to accept a photograph as proof alone. We trust our residents, and we go out based on that statement from the resident and look at what's happening with the situation. A court is unlikely to enforce it solely based on a photograph with nothing else. So that's why we go out and get the information regarding what else we can find to back up the photograph.
Okay, so so that's not good enough to levy a fine. Okay, thank you. I thought it would be something like that, but I think it's good for residents to hear that from our city attorney. Thank you.
Well, it sounds as if we're heading towards consensus, and thank you. 90% compliance is amazing, so that's a great start. And
Not to undercut my own argument, but it's 90% of the people we've caught.
Okay, all
So I won't argue with people. When people, I get calls occasionally, and people say, my neighbor does it, and he knows he's timing it for when you aren't there. And that may be true. We try to mix up hours to try to catch them, but we probably aren't catching everybody, but I think it's been good compliance overall.
and making homeowners responsible. So we ready for a motion?
I have no idea how to distill that into a motion. Let me try something general, like even appealing maybe to a little common sense here. Could a very general motion be that staff come back, is authorized to spend some time coming back with text amendment options and further research information as expressed in our deliberations tonight?
Yep.
And what about the chainsaws?
Well, I'm including that one. I would
Okay.
like to see the 16-inch or the less than 16-inch be a text amendment prepared to prohibit those and for us to consider.
Okay, great. Second? Okay, great. Roll call, please, Gail.
Councilmember Francina,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney,
Yes.
Mayor Sticks,
Yes.
Councilmember Wyrick?
Yes.
Councilmember Blatz?
Yes.
Okay, great, wonderful. All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and we will come back with number 4. Thank you. Okay, we're back. Let's move on to number 4, public feedback summary in response to proposed permanent electronic emergency message board at Rotary Park. And thanks to James and staff for doing such a great job collecting data and getting feedback.
Thank you. And we have just a couple slides with some of that data, and some of that data is in the packet. We received a lot of data. I guess I'll start by saying that.
Wow, 1,500 visits, huh?
Yeah. So for this item, yeah, we a couple months back we came to council, and I don't know why my slides disappeared. Here we go. Okay, all right. I might just, I'll do it without the slides. Yeah. Yeah, let me see. I'll do it without the slides. We had some slides with some images, but it's not working, so. But the data's all in the report. A couple months back, we presented a proposal for a permanent electronic message board at Rotary Park at the Y. And we had talked about, we had drafted a policy where that could be used to put out certain types of information, including emergency messaging, but also some other information about community events and things. And we heard, the city council asked us to do some outreach to get feedback from the community on that proposal. So we did outreach, which included, social media postings and some other items, but most notably it included the big demonstration board down at the Y, where we asked people to go online and take our survey. We had that a web page created for people to go online and take the survey. That web page had 1,537 visits in, I believe it was 3 weeks is how long we had it open. So 1,500 visits, 731 people, roughly half actually completed the survey, so that actually took the time to do the survey. And out of the survey participants, 571 opposed the permanent electronic emergency message board. 35 people supported the board, and 269 said that they would not support a permanent board, but they would support a portable trailer for emergencies only, similar to the one that we had on site at various points this year, but again, for emergency use only. In addition to that survey, we also engaged on social media. We got comments from the community. Some of those comments are included, or a lot of those comments are included. I think we have about 12 pages of comments in the packet that people, if you're looking for...
We should read some out loud.
Yeah, if you're looking for something to do, go ahead and read it. It's interesting. Message. So at this point, I think hearing that feedback, hearing the concerns from the community, and knowing that council had asked us for that feedback, we looked at what we could do that worked with that feedback. So what we are proposing is that the city purchase a new speed monitoring awareness radar trailer that allows for variable messages to be posted. And that portable sign, similar to what we have, but it's a nicer, newer one, and the one that we have is needs repairs and things like that. So this would give us a second sign. It would give the city a second sign. It would allow the city to pull that out during emergencies and get messaging up quickly and easily. And so we are recommending that the city council replace, on all of our emergency plans, we replace the permanent message board language with the portable message board language, and that the council authorize us to, staff to purchase that equipment. It is a lower cost. The permanent message boards, I think it was $42,000 for one. The temporary message board that has all the speed monitoring functionality and the message boards functionality with the ability to update that wirelessly is $22,000. The Measure C budget currently has $8,000 towards the project. So we would have to allocate an additional $14,300. So staff's recommending that the city council allocate that funding and authorize staff to purchase that signage, the temporary signage. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, James. Questions from council? James, could you put, thank you. Randy, question?
James, if we bought 2 of these, do you think we'd get any type of a discount?
Actually, I don't, we did look at that. It's just the same price times 2, so.
And right now, we use the police department's sign?
So we actually have one as a city, and we use the sheriff's department.
Sheriff's Department.
As the second one. And so we have that capability right now, but one of the issues and what started this conversation was being able to have one that we could pull out quickly and update wirelessly during an emergency.
Right.
We don't have that capability yet.
The one that we have does not have that capability. So the one if we move to purchase would have those capabilities?
Yes.
So again, would that benefit us at that time to buy 2 versus and keep the third as a backup? When I think of an emergency, I think of 2 ends of town.
Yeah.
I don't think of one end of town. I think of the Y, and I think of the Santa Paula route out.
Yeah,
That's all.
here's what, that's a good question. I think what I would suggest is if we can get an authorization for the first, and then I will work with our team and review the second one, because it needs some repairs as well. So if we're able to get it up to speed, we'll do that. If not, then we'll put a consent item on a future agenda to purchase the
That's
second one.
doable. Thank you, Mary.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, we'll move on to public comment.
If anyone in the Zoom queue would like to comment on this item, please use the raise hand function now.
All right, let's move on to discussion. Bill?
I'm just going to cut to the chase. Thank you, the public, for expressing so clearly, and I'm going to move that we approve staff recommendations. 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, I'll second that. All right, a roll call, please, Gail.
Mayor Sticks?
Yes.
Councilmember Francina?
Oh, yes.
Councilmember Wyrick?
Yes?
Councilmember Blatz?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney?
Yes, but we really should have read some of these comments out loud.
Well, the comments
Okay,
are
we're going to move on to number 5. Sarasota,
I appreciated the clear expression. Come on.
Sarasota multi-purpose sports courts, basketball and futsal. So, James, you want to take that away?
Yes, thank you. So again, we had a couple slides, but it's not cooperating, so I'll keep this brief. In 2016, the city updated the Sarasota Park master plan and had a master plan update. In that update, there were several items identified that the as priority projects for the park. The first item was the picnic area upgrades, which has been completed. Oh, that's weird. So somehow the slide is on the screen, so I'll take it. Yeah. Huh. I won't worry about it, and I'll ask James if you're listening to just go back to the regular view. I won't worry about the slide. Thank you. But so the first item was the picnic area upgrades, which have been completed. The next project on the list was the multi-purpose sports courts for basketball and futsal, which is a 5-on-5 hard top soccer game. And so we had some slides, as we showed, with some images. They're also in the packet. But this is Project 2 on the Sarasota Park Master Plan. The city had proceeded with development of this project. We had started with the engineering, and there was a construction cost estimate of $328,000. The Ojai Civic Association provided a $127,000 grant, and then the city also applied for and in 2021 received a $182,000 grant from the state of California. And so the remaining gap was expected to be about $25,000 and was included in Measure C funding. However, the point of this report really is to update that this project has been impacted with the supply chain disruption cost increases that everybody, it seems like everybody hears about on every topic at this point. We have an engineering firm, Stantec, updating the costs right now, and their most recent estimate a couple weeks ago was that the costs had increased from $328,000 to $492,000. And so it's pretty frustrating. And, as we worked on getting a $180,000 grant, the costs increased $150,000. So we're not much better off than we were a year ago applying for this grant. So that wasn't part of what we expected when we were working through that process. But so at this time, we have $335,000 available between the Civic Association grant, the state grant, and the match from the city of $25,000. But we're still $156,000 short of funding the project. And so we looked at some options, really there's two options at this point. One would be proceed with the project as soon as possible using Measure C funding to offset the $156,000 deficit. Now, we can do that while still applying for grants, but we can proceed and get it done so that the costs don't keep increasing, which is ultimately what staff's recommending at this point. And then if we receive grants, we can then pay ourselves back from that if we receive grants to do so. The other option at this point is to delay the project and seek additional grant funding. But our concern, and the reason we're bringing this forward now, and this is kind of an extra review that we don't normally do, but the concern we have with delaying the project to seek additional grants is we think that those cost increases could just keep outpacing the grant funding. And so that's an option, but it's likely that the costs will increase, and it's also important to note that the state grant expires in 2024, so we don't have an unlimited time frame to wait. So we're bringing this item back. Normally, we wouldn't bring this item back until we were ready to bid it out. But we're bringing it back now because if the council supports funding it with Measure C, we will move forward aggressively to bid it out and move forward with construction. If we don't, it'll be delayed until we apply for grants. So we're recommending moving forward with the Measure C funding of $159,000. And again, we would still continue to apply for grants and things in the meantime, but knowing that council supports funding that would allow us to move forward. The last thing I'll mention is that this was on the Parks and Rec Commission's agenda at their most recent meeting last week. We wanted to ask them if this, with the cost increase, if this project was still a priority project for the commission. And they did confirm that this is a high priority project for Zarazoti Park. So with that, we're recommending proceeding, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Quick question. I've been asking for several years now that we address that bottleneck visual blight dumpster situation at the entrance to the area we're going to see increased usage of if we go ahead and approve the multi-sport fields.
Yep.
Do we have any cost estimate for dealing with that situation?
We do. I'm trying to remember it offhand because if I remember right, we thought it was going to be a high amount and then it came in much lower. But I don't really want to say it off the top of my head in case I'm wrong, but I think we thought it was something like 60 grand, and I think the estimate actually came in, it was closer to like 30 grand. So we do have that, and it's also in the C, I believe it's also in Measure C this year, but we'll make sure.
It's already in Measure C then.
Yeah.
Then I withdraw my question because
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that has been a real issue that we get constant complaints about, especially for the user of the ball fields. Sorry.
Yeah. So we'll
It's in the list, so I'll withdraw my comment.
yeah, and we'll confirm that. We'll make sure to, again, with the next meeting being Measure C, we'll make sure to point that one out for that meeting.
Can I get
Randy,
a
question?
clarification? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mayor. Can I get a clarification? We're talking about the trash can enclosure on the entrance of the southern end of Zarazoti Park. And we're getting a bid of $30,000 to take that down?
To move it.
to move it.
Yeah. So it's
How do you relocate a block wall?
it's to demolish the existing one and to put a trash enclosure in elsewhere.
Okay, okay. I'll hold my thought. I'll hold my tongue.
Thank you. A question, how long do you think, James, it would take to repay Measure C?
So we would start applying for grants immediately. The other thing with this is, I think I did put in the report, but right this minute, there are no grants that we qualify for that can be applied for this. So part of it depends on, as grants open up, we'll apply for them. So what my hope would be, it took us a year to get the $180,000 in funding. So my hope would be that in the next year, we identify and obtain another grant for $150,000.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions? Any public comments, Gail?
If anyone in the Zoom queue would like to comment on this item, please use the raised hand function now.
Okay, let's move on to discussion. Brent?
This is a no-brainer for me. You know, this master plan for this facility started when I was chair of Recreation and Parks Commission, and it was Carlin Strobel who was actually, I think it was the rotational mayor at the time, and she was our liaison, and we kept talking about this. And she said, stop talking about it and figure out how to do it. And she goes, I'm not gonna do it. You need to get public buy-in and you need to get the community. And that's exactly what this next commission did, is they actually got the master plan built. This has been 6 years in the making. They are methodically working through this plan. And I couldn't think of a better gift for children in this facility than having, an outdoor basketball facility that all could use, as well as the foosball. So I'm excited about it. And I'd be willing to make a motion after everyone's commented.
I want to second your motion when you make it.
Okay. Well, I think we're all on the same page here, and what a great, exciting, and so wonderful thing. Do you want to make a motion?
So the motion would be to proceed with, thank you. That was simple. I was looking for bigger words. I was just gonna read Sarasota multipurpose basketball and futsal sports courts, but that's fine, James. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Don't we have to say that the motion has to say proceed as soon as possible with Measure C funding?
I think we can actually have consensus on this, because we'll have to bring the bid back, so. I think I see a consensus, or hear a consensus, so we'll proceed with that plan and then bring the item back when it's ready to bid out.
Okay, and Susan seconded, so,
Yeah.
okay,
I
so,
seconded.
roll call, please, Gail?
Mayor Pro Tem Haney?
Yes, and at the time, I just wanted to, at the same time, Mayor, again, the Ojai Civic Association does so much for this community. And again, they're footing the bill for half of this. We gotta tip our hat to them and say thank you for making this happen. So that's a yes.
Councilmember Blatz?
Yes.
Mayor Sticks?
Yes.
Councilmember Wyrick?
Yes, and let's not forget the dumpster enclosure situation.
Yep.
And Councilmember Francina?
I want to say yes, and I want to add how much my little granddaughters and I enjoy Sarasota Park. We're there oftentimes twice a week, and sometimes we're the only ones there for inexplicable reasons. And then on the same morning, the next week, it's just filled with kids, all ages and play groups and activities. It's just so wonderful. I'm just so glad we have it. So thank you to staff and for Civic Association, all the people that make Sarasota Park happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. All right, and we'll move on to our last item, number 6, a request from 2 council members to consider a donation to the Ojai Community Farmers Market for an Earth Day celebration. So we'll turn it over to Susan. Bill?
I think we may have somebody in the wings from the Earth Day committee. Let me get my notes out. But Bill, do you want to take the lead on this?
Sure.
I mean, the report is pretty straightforward. Or do we have to read it? What do we have to do?
You want me to proceed, Susan?
Yeah, you know, I would just read the letter, I think, but my voice is so kind of hoarse. You know, to Ojai City Council members, that I think that would explain it, I think. Attachment A, unless you have another way that you want to proceed.
Yeah, I would just like to summarize that we've traditionally supported Earth Day with general fund money. This is a very modest amount. I really appreciate that we have a structured proposal from Julie Gerard that is, you know, very clear, the kind of thing that we always looking for. I also especially like the fact that this is going to be a very children-oriented Earth Day celebration, and in the venue that really works well over there in the combined with the community-oriented farmers market on Thursday. So I just think it's well worth doing this for the modest amount of $2,600 funded from the reserve fund.
I'll add a comment. The emphasis is also on education, and her letter states we are adding 14 local nonprofit vendors, each of whom will be sharing an earth-friendly and informative activity with our community. There will be special activities in our Kids Corner presented by local teachers, a bicycle valet provided by the Ojai Valley Green Coalition in partnership with the Mob Shop, live music, speakers, and a blessing of our earth and our valley by our local Shumash elder, Julie Tumamite. And then, of course, this is an opportunity for council members to have an audience, and we can speak on environmental issues that concern us and climate resiliency and all of that. I think, I imagine that Mayor Betsy Sticks will give a speech. And I think we're all invited to give speeches as far as I know. So can we see if there's, if Julie Gerard is in the, unless other council members have comments and questions, could we see if Julie Gerard is waiting to speak? Hello?
So we have two people with their hands raised. Oh. We have two people with their hands raised. One is named Julie, so I'm going to bring her in and oh, no, we have two people. Julie, if you are there, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and there you go. You can go ahead and speak.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Sticks and all of the city council members. I appreciate you taking the time to review our proposal, and you are all invited to speak, and Mayor Betsy Sticks is slated to speak at the event, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Julie. Any questions from council? I just want to say thank you, Julie, for organizing this, also to Christoph Wallen, and it's going to be a wonderful event. Thank you. All right, can we?
One more.
We have another public comment, Gail?
We have one more speaker who has his hand raised, Steve Quillisi. I'll go ahead and bring him in. Mr. Quillisi, if you're there, if you can unmute yourself, you can go ahead and speak.
Thank you very much, Gail. And Mayor and council members, I am speaking to encourage you not to spend this money. We had a long discussion this evening about where the city is financially, where the reserves are financially, how long it's going to take to recover the city's finances. We just saw the El Roblar hotel project approved this week, but it's going to be 18 months before any of that TOT money starts to flow into the city's coffers. And I would recommend that if the school district wishes to have an Earth Day celebration, I'm all for it. I don't think it's necessary for the city to subsidize it, especially $1,000 for musicians and speakers and $500 for marketing material seems wasteful to me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve. All right, let's move on to discussion. Ryan?
I appreciate Commissioner Quillisi's remarks. I do think it's a reasonable amount to spend on this, though, and I think it's something that is a great idea. And I had a chance to see Chris a few weeks back and let me know what he was looking to do, and I just really support this. I really appreciate that they've made the budget so small. Had it been more money than this, then we might have had a more significant question. But at what seems a very reasonable amount to add a little bit of flavor to this event, I think is a great idea. And I still do hope at some point we combine some of the other events that are going on right around the same time into more of a Earth Day event. I got a chance to talk to Chris about that, but I think it's going to be a great event, and I'm proud we're throwing a little bit of money at it. And as respectful as I am to the budget, I don't think it's an unreasonable amount for something like this.
Bill and then Souza?
Well, I'm, again, going to cut to the chase and move that we approve the $2,600 to support the Ojai Community Farmers Market effort at Earth Day celebration.
I'll second.
Okay. And I just want to add one item, as we move forward and we're getting a little have more of a procedure in terms of the application. So the application for next year, for 2023, will be April 22nd, correct?
Yes, so applications for community funding, which is where this would typically be considered, are actually open Friday and are open till the 22nd for next year. So I would say if anybody is interested in doing something similar next year, get your application in ASAP. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, we have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call, please, Gail?
Councilmember Blatz?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney?
Yes.
Councilmember Wyrick?
Yes.
Mayor Sticks?
Yes.
Councilmember Francina?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, we will move on to council members' reports. Anything to report out?
Very quickly, tomorrow morning, they're having in my capacity as a commissioner with the Ventura County Transportation Commission, they're having a visioning session down at the Ventura County Museum for hours, I think from 9 to 2 or something like that. And there are a lot of interesting, broad-ranging discussions going on along the lines of the sustainability discussions that we've had. So it's going to be I'll report back with more specifics of what happens at that workshop.
Thank you. Anything else? Nope. All right, we will move on to city man. Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan. Go ahead.
I don't know when else to bring it up, but I heard there was a, because it's not really a future agenda item, but I want to bring it up because I found out about it during the meeting. But I heard that there was a car that flipped over on the ATP today. And I was hoping we could get more information about what happened. And I have no idea if the ATP was related. I just know it was in the area in front of Nordhoff. And I have no idea more than that. It looked like the gentleman who I saw in the picture was okay. It was on Facebook. And I don't know if we have any more information at this point, but I would definitely like to know as much as we can in case there's anything that we need to consider incorporated into the project.
So I haven't heard, but Sergeant Cadman, I don't know, have you heard anything about this or the cause?
This accident happened later in the afternoon, and I also heard over the radio about the traffic accident. I don't know the cause of it. I don't know if there's any injuries to the driver yet, but I can find that information out and get it to you tomorrow morning. But yeah,
Check the Ojai Valley News website, talk to, I believe, local sheriff about not the cause, but related to injuries and stuff. There's no injuries, police reported.
Yeah. Okay. Basically, that's a report from the Ojai Valley News to check their website with more information. There's no mic there, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, so we'll get an update out as soon as we have information on what the cause is, and if anything needs to happen, we'll make sure to include it on the next agenda.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the city manager's report.
There.
Oh, I'm
There.
sorry.
This, I got to chuckle. This is like going to CNN. You know, CNN's going to have the news before anyone else has the news. It's like, oh, Ojai Valley News is our new CNN. I love it. Thank you, Kimberly.
On the next week, or for city manager's report, I just will note that the next agenda right now, the current items scheduled, we had a request from the Arts Commission to have the presentation be focused on the public art tour. And so that is something that we're planning for the next meeting as far as presentations go. For discussion items, we have Chief Rivera will give the yearly crime stats report. And then we'll have the second budget workshop focused on CIP. And we're working right now to try to bring the paving report at the same time. We're in progress, so I'm not sure if that will happen for sure yet, but if so, those will be the big items on the next agenda, so.
Okay, thank you.
A quick question
yeah,
for the
sure, go
city
ahead.
manager, when it's appropriate. You mentioned the insurance rates, and I'm interested, you know, you mentioned that was one of the things that the JPIA was reporting was loss from property crimes, of which we have little. And the point I'm trying to make is, how large is the actuarial calculation district that we're part of? Does that include all of Southern California, just Ventura County? How granular is that? Because obviously that's what's going to dictate the actuarial experience, is going to dictate the change in insurance rates. And I'm just kind of curious, a little bit of knowledge of how JPIA breaks that down by actuarial experience for adjusting those risk-based insurance rates.
Yeah, we could bring some information on that at either the second or the third budget workshop. We get like the cover sheet that says, here's your rates, here's what they're gonna be, and here's, a brief explanation why, and then they do send several pages of supporting information. So I didn't dig into it, but we can take a look at that and kind of figure out what they're basing that on. But they did say their general report was that every agency there that they have is going to have increased insurance costs this year. So,
Just to add to that, as a small business owner, I belong to an association of landscape contractors. And it's interesting how our rates have always gone up and down, and a lot of it is based on what Bill just said about the actuaries. Larger cities have larger concerns, but if you're bundled with them, you're just part of it. You're just a part of that number, and that's the sad part about insurances.
Any future agenda items?
I had one more question for the city
Oh.
manager. You're gonna bring back paving, but that's part of the CIP.
yes, so we're trying to bring them both back at the same time, with the idea being the CIP is the budget, and then paving would be what we're actually going to pave this year. That's the part we're working to
But paving
try
is
to
a
bring
part
back.
of that CIP budget.
So it'll be part of it. It'll be part of the discussion either way, but the question is how detailed we're going to be able to get. We're trying to work on being able to get into the detail, so.
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead, Souza.
Oh, James, do you have any idea when we're going to report, give the council an update from the parking committee?
That's a good question. So we have the budget committee had a couple of things we were working on follow-up. And I think that by maybe mid-May, we'd have gotten the answers or the next steps on those. So we could probably do a parking committee update on the second meeting in May. So I think that's when we would schedule that.
I just think it's also important for the public to know that we have a parking committee working on parking issues.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll pencil that in right now for the second meeting in May.
It's a great committee. We're making some really good progress. Okay, thank you.
Any future agenda items? No? Okay, well, thank you all for a productive and peaceful meeting, and much gratitude to everyone here for participation. So we're adjourned.